China's role in designing the COVID virus is increasingly getting nailed. A report by a US government national laboratory has concluded that COVID virus could actually have leaked from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, this classified report, which found its way into the US media, calls for a detailed investigation. Scientists...
Nearly 4 million deaths. Every country on earth affected. Untold billions in damage. A bleeding world of uncertainty. Could it all have begun right here in a biological lab in China's Wuhan? Was the virus responsible for COVID-19 irresponsibly engineered here and unleashed upon the world by a careless or insidious China? Whatever the reality, the hunt for the truth has just received its biggest boost so far. A US government national laboratory report on the origins of COVID-19 has concluded it is plausible that the virus leaked from a Chinese lab in Wuhan and that this deserves further investigation. The revelation comes in a Wall Street Journal special report quoting people familiar with the classified document. The study, prepared this time last year by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, was used by the State Department under President Trump when it began the quest to nail down the origins of the coronavirus. While speculation and finger-pointing have muddied the waters ever since in favor of China, this US report is hugely damning, since this assessment drew on genomic analysis of the COVID-19 virus. The revelation comes just weeks after President Biden said he had ordered his administration to nail down the viral origins. China has totally stonewalled all global attempts to investigate the Wuhan lab. Extremely suspicious conduct, especially on the back of nearly 4 million deaths. The genomic analysis study adds meat to two scenarios widely considered to be the only two possibilities. That the virus either escaped after a laboratory accident thanks to China's extremely poor safety standards, or that it emerged from human contact with an infected animal. The big question now is whether the new report's damning conclusions from over a year ago strengthen the world's pressure on China. Bureau Report, India Today.
India Today's Shiv Arur now joins me for more on this big story. Shiv, bring us details of this report and what role will this play in investigations that the US is carrying out?
Gaurav, the conclusions of this particular report basically point to the fact that as early as May 2020, the last stages of the Trump administration, when this national laboratory report had been commissioned and when it made its conclusions, it was categorical when it said that it is plausible, basically likely, that this coronavirus had come out from a Wuhan laboratory and not from the prevalent theory at that time, which was a seafood wet market somewhere in Wuhan. Now, since this report came out, it's been completely classified. It's now been reported on by the Wall Street Journal. But in that time, since it has been, since it came out, till the time it has been reported, there have been other developments. We've seen China suspiciously and insidiously completely stonewalling any possibility of a global investigation, even though you've got the Biden administration pushing very strongly for it as recently as last month. You've got the WHO basically continuing its pandering to the Chinese government by saying, there's not much we can do if the Chinese continue to stonewall us as far as Wuhan is concerned. But it's China's entire behavior, the fact that they are completely disallowing a global investigation despite practically every country calling for one, that is the biggest indicator that the genomic analysis and sequencing analysis study that's been conducted by this national laboratory, are on the money. They obviously have something to hide. They don't want an investigation. The very fact that the fingers pointed at them have been turned away by the Chinese. They've been trying to rally support among their satellite states like Pakistan and others across the world, point to the fact that the Chinese have something to hide. Credible scientists, credible laboratories have repeatedly said that this is something that came out of a laboratory and that the Wuhan wet market scenario is complete bogus.
Remember, scientists have studied this virus for over a year now and have come to this conclusion. As US intelligence agencies probe the source of the coronavirus, former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has suggested an alliance of democracies to demand the truth from China. A powerful alliance with economic clout could well persuade China perhaps to share more information and give access to the Wuhan lab, which incidentally wasn't done when the World Health Organization team had visited Wuhan. There will be a fight back from the Chinese Communist Party, he warns, but democracies need to stand firm and push back. But will that happen remains the big question. As US intelligence agencies probe the origins of COVID-19 virus, former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has urged US President Joe Biden to punish China's COVID wrongdoings. Pompeo has been vocal about the Chinese origin of the virus and insists that democratic forces must come together to impose costs on China before it's too late.
Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence committee continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
In a hard-hitting opinion piece, Pompeo has argued that the Chinese Communist Party regime, headed by President Xi Jinping, has already committed more than enough wrongdoings to warrant a strong response by leading democracies of the world. Pompeo writes, there is overwhelming evidence that for weeks in late 2019 and early 2020, as the coronavirus was loose in China and people fell ill, Beijing covered up its dangers, exponentially accelerating international harm.
We strongly believe that the Chinese Communist Party did not report the outbreak of the new coronavirus in a timely fashion to the World Health Organization. Even after the CCP did notify the WHO of the coronavirus outbreak, China didn't share all of the information it had. Instead, it covered up how dangerous the disease is. It didn't report sustained human-to-human transmission for a month until it was in every province inside of China. It censored those who tried to warn the world. It ordered a halt to testing of new samples, and it destroyed existing samples.
Pompeo views China's actions as reckless, both in terms of the research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, from where, according to his information, the virus was first unleashed on the world, to the activities of the unsanitary Wuhan wet market. Pompeo argues that leading democracies need to act together and use their economic might to persuade China to cooperate with investigations. The former US Secretary of State also calls for imposition of costs on the Communist Party of China, its leadership, and their economic activities. He suggests that the US can lead by taking unilateral steps and follow it up with multilateral actions against the Chinese Communist Party leaders and entities, including not protecting their assets hidden abroad. Bureau Report, India Today. Will democracy stand up to China? It's easier said than done. Joining me on India First, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and India Today's Foreign Affairs Editor Geeta Mohan. Geeta, is the US actually mounting pressure on China, or is the US president, as some analysts argue, deflecting domestic pressure by ordering this probe?
Well, Gaurav, to be honest, there is immense amount of domestic pressure on President Biden, but it does not take away from the fact that the U.S. administration is intent and hell-bent on ensuring that there is investigations into the origins of the virus. Having said that, this is not the first time, and we know that the Trump administration has continued pursuing this. You've been reporting on it. Mike Pompeo has, as Secretary of State, and even after has been insisting on one thing and one thing alone, that this is not a natural outcome, that this is a lab-tweaked virus, and that's why China should be held accountable. So immense pressure on the United States of America, but also more importantly, how can the international community come together and hold China to account when China has penetrated into most of the important international organizations across the globe, particularly the United Nations.
Ambassador Prakash, Mike Pompeo argues that the regime of Xi Jinping has already committed more than enough wrongdoings, in his words, to warrant a strong response from the world's leading democracies. Does the US lab report strengthen this argument? Will this have any impact whatsoever on Xi Jinping's regime?
Gaurav, good evening. I'm afraid what Mr. Pompeo has to say, I will characterize it as too little, too late. Let me elaborate. You have asked one set of very pertinent questions. There is another set of equally pertinent questions. 20th May 2020, the National Lab in California issued a highly confidential report, 20th May 2020. The change of office happened on the 20th January 2021. 8 months, Gaurav, please note 8 months. The lab report would have straight gone to the president. What happened for 8 months? Very interestingly, there are developments which need to be looked into. The report found its way to the State Department in October 2020, for 5 months, when Mr. Pompeo was the Secretary of State and former CIA director.
Yes.
Then the findings of the State Department went to the White House formally on the 15th of January 2021. Now, my question is, why was it kept confidential? Was there an effort not to rock the boat? Somehow I get a sense that the effort or the desire of the Trump presidency was to shake the boat, not rock it.
Okay.
If this is so time sensitive, that this should have been made public immediately. Now, from mid-November 2019 to where we stand today, Gaurav, 18 months have passed. It is almost as if there was an effort to go slow. I'm only deducing, I'm not accusing anybody, I'm just deducing.
No, but that's a fair point that you make, that, they want to shake the boat, they don't want to rock the boat. Because Geeta, Mike Pompeo argues democracies need to come together and use their economic clout. But are US and Europe on the same page? Or even within the US, are White House and State Department, for example, on the same page? Or is the effort, as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash says, shake the boat, don't rock it, try and perhaps intimidate, maybe a strong word, scare China to behave? And that's not going to happen with European countries looking for a good deal with China.
Well, that's right, Gaurav. I completely agree with Ambassador Prakash, but also important to note over here is that during the same time frame, there were a lot of conversations between the United States of America and China with regards to trade. Trump was not giving up on trade, and Trump wanted his free deal on the economic front, ignoring maybe one of the most important aspects and the challenges of his administration. But in terms of the current scenario also, we're seeing a president who is looking to now holding China to account, but does the United States of America, or for that matter, the international community, Gaurav, have the teeth to really take on China and not just challenge China, hold it to account? I suppose right now, again, I keep going back to the penetration that we see of China, not just in international organizations. You're very rightly pointing out the European Union bilaterally. So many countries that China has penetrated into are not one objective or raising concerns with regards to China. Hungary, there are protests in Hungary that are taking place even as we speak.
Yes.
And this is regarding universities of China that want to establish themselves in Hungary. People are coming out into the streets and they're protesting it. But Hungary is a country that has been supporting China and stopping every anti-China move in the European Union. And that's not the only country. There are quite a few others who are part of the BRI project of China. So it is a scary scenario where even a pandemic and a country, if the country is responsible, is not going to be held to account because of the penetration it has within international organizations and bilaterally in so many regions that it just seems like the United States of America now, like Ambassador Prakash is saying, has done very little, very late. And even if the report comes, there's nothing much in terms of findings from the Wuhan lab
Oh,
that they really
absolutely.
can
And
probe into.
that's a cause for concern, Ambassador Prakash, because China has gotten away. For example, it's flexed its muscles in South China Sea. Almost no response. China continues its atrocities virtually unchecked against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, against forces of democracy in Hong Kong. Will Wuhan go exactly the same way, despite 40 lakh people, close to 40 lakh people losing their lives and millions more impacted?
Gaurav, you are spot on, and that brings me to another point. The U.S. is the biggest power. We know how the U.S. reacts, and rightly so, even if it loses 5 American lives, because any country is proud to protect American lives. 600,000 people dead, and there is no action. And now slowly the facts are tumbling out, or there are straws in the wind, Gaurav. There will never be a smoking gun because 18 months have passed. There will be circumstantial evidence and straws in the wind. It is quite clear that there was a lot of activities and cooperation going on between the Eco Health Alliance of
Yes.
Peter Daszak and the Wuhan Virology Institute. For 4 years, $600,000 was transferred. That gain of function research was being done. I think it is more or less established that Wuhan lab never followed adequate safety protocols is established. So, and information was being exchanged. Now, another question that I would raise is that the behavior of Dr. Tedros has been exceptionally suspicious.
Yes.
Yet the U.S. has been giving grants, funds. True, Dr. Tedros cannot be removed, but why can the U.S. not propose a vote of no confidence against Dr. Tedros? Why is Dr. Tedros being allowed to continue? Why is China being mollycoddled? You know what, Gaurav, there are more answers than more questions than answers, and I'm afraid there is a semi-code of silence how I can deduce, because there are things happening which we do not know.
So there are fingers being pointed even at Dr. Anthony Fauci or this research, because Geeta, when Mike Pompeo argues for imposition of costs on Chinese communist leadership and entities in China, this practically appears to be a pipe dream given China's economic might, given that China virtually continues to do what it wants unchecked.
Well, absolutely, Gaurav. Look at just a simple example of the kind of equipment that were required during the pandemic across the globe, and the only provider was China. In fact, all the companies in the United States of America who came forward to help India were sourcing all the equipment, all the medical resources from China. So whilst we are having this discussion with regards to what the United States of America can do and the economic might of both countries, one has to realize that unless and until, and which is increasingly the conversation now, unless and until there are alternative supply chains, China is going to be a critical factor in not just the global supply chains, in the global economic order as well. And that certainly is an area of concern. Is the reason also why most of the countries, including in Europe, are not raising their voices against China. The WHO highly dependent on China as well in terms of funds. We're looking at a country that plays a critical role and is one of the reasons why the entire global community is faced with such an immense challenge, and there is nothing that one can really do about how to hold China to account.
Is anything happening, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, to change this, to change, to have alternate supply chains in place? Because while you may point that China has the supply chains and there will be supply chain disruptions in case action is taken, is there actually no solid pushback? Do you see any of that happening?
You know, Gaurav, I'm not pointing fingers, but there is this human tendency of looking only at the short term. Politicians worldwide do the same. In the long term, nobody's looking at long term. While Europe was struggling with the Wuhan virus, and there was Chinese malpractices were known, Germany, it is on record, was pushing for an investment treaty with China. Germany was pushing for an investment treaty. Trade with China continues. Only about 8% of the American companies have pulled out of China. So, unfortunately, this applies to every country, the short-term gains are more important. And China is using it. They are laughing all their way to the bank because they know that people will hum and haw. But when it comes to the brass tacks, they will be back saying, let us do business. So, calling upon the international community by Mike Pompeo is nothing more than a bit of a bluster, if I were to say most respectfully at this stage, because when he could have acted, he did not. He spoke out.
Is Quad also then bluster? How does Quad fit into, if we were to talk of a fight back?
Quad, yes. My own take is that Quad is a good option, but Quad will be tested when there is some action happening in the South China Sea. There is growing concern of Chinese use of power against force against Taiwan, and that is the time the Quad will be tested. There will be enough cases of Quad will be tested. We will see whether countries live up to the billing.
Fair enough. I will let that be the last word on this part of the discussion. Ambassador Vishnu, Prakash and Geeta, Mohan, many thanks for joining me. Up next,